When I was a kid, my dad would take us camping almost every year in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. We would hike along the valleys and fish in the ponds that dotted the little creeks like pearls on a string. I remember one time I was fishing and I heard this monstrous slap in the water. I looked up just in time to catch a beaver diving under the surface. And it just clicked right then. These little ponds weren't part of the landscape, at least not like the rest of it, formed by weather and geology. They were constructed. I was an interloper into an entire engineered ecosystem that industrious rodents had built to their own design. Is that experience why I became a civil engineer? Wouldn't it be funny if that were true, if I just really thought that beavers were cool and wanted to grow up to become the human equivalent of one? It's actually kind of the opposite, and not just because that beaver scared me when it slapped its tail. When I became a dam engineer, beavers became my professional rival. They gained their knowledge over millions of years of evolution. I gained mine from a handful of years in a university. Without a single blueprint, degree, or bulldozer, the beavers were showing me up. I don't work on dams anymore, but this is still something that keeps me up at night. I've spent a lot of time considering the differences between the professional practices that have culminated from centuries of human progress and the innate behaviors of these cute but unusual creatures. There are some surprising similarities, some glaring discrepancies, and a growing admission around the world that the rodents might have a better dam system. I'm Grady, and this is Practical Engineering. It's not unusual for animals to build stuff. There are lots of interesting examples of bioengineering out there. From intricately woven webs to towering termite nests to sprawling prairie dog towns and even underwater crop circles. What's impressive about what beavers do is the scale of it. They're a keystone species because their presence affects the ecosystem so significantly. Beavers' ability to reshape the landscape to fit their needs gives them an enormous advantage. The historic range of the 2 beaver species on Earth covers pretty much the entirety of the continental US and Canada in North America, plus a huge area of Eurasia. They can live almost anywhere because, just like us, if a habitat doesn't suit them, they just fix it so it does. Not all beavers build dams, but a lot of them do. And their dams are not really that complicated. It usually starts with some branches or rocks at the base to kind of anchor things in place. Then it's just a pile of interlocking sticks and logs. Finally, they place mud, leaves, and grass along the upstream face of the pile to make it more and more watertight. If you're familiar with dam engineering, you probably recognize this design. It's basically a zoned embankment dam. Just like humans pile and compact soil and sometimes rock to create reservoirs, beavers do it with wood and mud, and the structural behavior is very similar. Branches interlock like soil and rock particles, creating a sort of friction that binds them into a stable mass. No cementing substance required. Not only that, beavers also use different materials to do different jobs. Logs and branches are large and locked together well. They work perfectly to form the bulk of the structure, but a large mass of just trees is highly permeable. Mud and leaves are less permeable, but they wouldn't form a stable structure on their own. Applied as a layer on the upstream face of a mass of logs and branches, they are an ideal way to plug up the holes and seal the structure. Our dams work in exactly the same way. Embankment dams are the most common type of dam in the world. They're not as glamorous as the concrete behemoths, but they work well and they're often more cost-effective to build. And it is very common that they're built in zones. Just like the beaver's branches, the bulk of an embankment dam uses a shell material where the specifications are looser. This soil can often be sourced nearby, reducing transportation costs, and it doesn't need to be sorted or separated so carefully since its primary job is to add mass. It's okay if water seeps through the shell because we also have a core. This is the impermeable zone made from clay, concrete, or asphalt that stops the water from flowing through, just like the Beavers' mud and leaves. Some human dams even put this layer on the upstream face, just like the Beavers, although most zoned embankment dams have it in the center where it's more protected from eroding away. So, equal points awarded for design philosophy. In fact, I think it's a pretty good example of convergent evolution of professional practice. The environmental pressures of resources that vary in cost and function made embankments the crabs of the dam world. But despite our similarities, humans and beavers are very different in how we build them. The first part of human dam construction is usually a process of diversion. You have to get the water out of the way so you can build in the dry. On some sites, it's as simple as digging a channel. For the more famous projects in big, rocky canyons, there were cofferdams and massive bypass tunnels. Beavers don't have this luxury. They just build right in the current, and this takes some ingenuity. Often the work is seasonal, taking advantage of drier parts of the year. The choice of stream also matters. Beavers don't impound enormous rivers like we do. They prefer smaller creeks and gentle valleys. They also don't stop the water on day one. The order of construction makes each next step possible. First, the rocks and heavy logs that will stay put in flowing water. Then the matrix of branches that lock together while still allowing the water to flow through. Only when the skeleton is there do they start placing the mud and finer debris to slowly raise the level of the water. I love this in a weird way. I think it's because it's how I remember building stuff as a kid. It's obvious what the next step is, so you don't really need an elaborate plan. It's kind of adaptable. You just see if one step needs extra effort here or there. Beavers are testing their construction every moment as they go. In that way, they really aren't exactly true engineers. They have no need to predict how something will behave. They just build and fix and build until it works, and there's something admirable in that. It's not to say that beaver dams don't fail, though. In fact, they're relatively fragile structures. Sometimes the mud layer loses its integrity, allowing water to resume flow through the embankment. Given enough time or a strong enough flow, this can break the dam apart and eventually wash it out. Sometimes the stream carves a path around the dam, blowing out the riverbanks on the sides. Many failures result from floods that simply overwhelm the dam. Every once in a while, those failures are dramatic on a human scale. In 1984, a failed beaver dam washed out a railroad embankment, causing an Amtrak passenger train to derail in Vermont, ultimately killing 5 people and injuring 150 more. A similar situation happened in Ontario in 1994 and in Michigan in 2003. Beavers show almost no consideration of margins. They use cheap, continuous labor as their factor of safety. A beaver dam is a dynamic structure. Its sensor array is the sound of running water. Beavers are super sensitive to it. When a leak happens, that audible cue triggers an automated biological repair loop. It works perfectly for continuous maintenance, but not for rare floods. Beavers design for the present, accepting, whether intentionally or just through ignorance, that when the river rises, their work will be ruined. Humans don't have the luxury of ignorance, at least in modern times. I guess it wasn't that long ago that we did. In the late 1800s, a bunch of wealthy elites modified an abandoned dam in Pennsylvania so that their hunting and fishing resort would have a nice lake full of stocked fish. When a relatively modest flood came in 1889, the dam overtopped and washed out, sending a wall of water downstream to Johnstown, killing more than 2,000 people. None of the members of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club ever admitted fault or were held responsible for the disaster. I have a whole chapter about the story in my new book, Disasters by Design: How Engineering Failures Shaped the Modern World. Pre-order link below if you want to pick up a copy. We remember the Johnstown flood and the other catastrophic dam failures that preceded and followed it. And we, collectively as a society, don't really tolerate those kinds of risks anymore. In fact, when you look at loading conditions for civil infrastructure, dams are designed for probably the most extreme events of any other type of structure. Many dams are built to withstand the probable maximum flood, which is literally the most severe flood we can conceive of for a given location. That's not so much to protect the dams themselves and the resources that went into building them, as it is to avoid the consequences to all the people and structures downstream if they fail. Once again, equal points to beavers and human dam engineers on this one. Beavers, with their little beaver brains, are necessarily less thoughtful about the consequences of their actions, but also their dams, almost always being fairly small and located in undeveloped areas, don't usually have serious consequences when they fail. Besides a few isolated calamities by the beavers, almost all the damage and destruction caused by dam failures has resulted from human-built structures. But failure isn't the only cause of damage and destruction when it comes to dams. Whether human or beaver-built, dams represent a substantial change to the local hydrology and ecology. We're kind of used to thinking of this in a binary way. Something is either good or bad for the environment, but when you get into the specifics, it gets a lot more complicated than that. The quote-unquote environment is extremely dynamic, constantly changing, and what's good for one part of it isn't always what's good for the rest of it. And good isn't always an objective baseline, it's a value judgment based on which outcome we choose to prioritize, and beavers really highlight that complexity. It seems like a paradox at first glance. Especially in modern times, beaver dams get a ton of credit for environmental uplift and restoration, while human engineers get flooded with red tape and potential regulatory penalties for doing the exact same thing. There are three big differences that explain the discrepancy. One is permeability. Beaver dams are messy, porous, dynamic structures. They act more like a sieve than a plug. Because they're usually small and built from mud and sticks, they cause much smaller changes to the flow of sediment, nutrients, and fish from one side to the other, especially when viewed on the larger scale of a whole regional ecosystem. Two is dynamism. Beaver dams are temporary, as we already discussed. They are fragile structures, frequently abandoned or washed away. When a beaver family moves on or their dam fails, the drained pond turns into a beaver meadow, which is a relatively rare and important type of habitat for plants and animals. Healthy stream systems go through these successions where the landscapes evolve and flourish, where a permanent human-built dam can lock them into stagnation or steady degradation. 3 is lateral connectivity. Because beaver dams are fairly short and don't have a spillway or floodgates, they just push water laterally into the floodplain, creating a patchwork of meadows and wetlands. These slow, shallow flows help improve water quality, helping to process pollutants, but they only slow the water down to a point. Large floods that are important for sediment and nutrient transport downstream aren't inhibited by beaver dams. On the other hand, human-made structures trap much more of the sediment and nutrients behind them, starving the downstream area. I have a whole video on this topic if you want to learn more. But you can see why, in many cases, beaver activity is in sync with what we generally consider to be river restoration or uplift. They augment processes that are net positives, like improving water quality, increasing the complexity of habitat, improving biodiversity, and facilitating groundwater recharge. Many biologists and environmental professionals introduce beavers as a form of environmental restoration. We even build fake beaver dams to achieve those benefits when the messy process of relying on rodents to do it isn't feasible, called beaver dam analogs. At this point, human dams seem to be clearly on the wrong side of the dam engineering spectrum of good and evil. Beavers aren't all good though. Because they change the landscape and ecology around them so substantially, they can be a serious nuisance. There are lots of cases where beavers flood areas we really don't want flooded, like pastures and agricultural crops. They clog up culverts, cause roads to overtop with water, damage infrastructure, weaken riverbanks with burrows, accelerating erosion, and they cut down an awful lot of trees. In Patagonia, beavers were brought for their fur in 1946. They've since become an invasive species, and with no natural predators, they're completely altering the sub-Antarctic forests. If it weren't so tragic, it would be kind of funny, because the primary reason beavers build their dams is totally different from the reasons that we build them. Human reservoirs serve a lot of purposes: water conservation, flood control, hydropower, and recreation. For beavers, it's mostly just protection. On land, wolves, bears, and eagles can catch a vulnerable beaver with ease. It's a whole other story in the water. Beavers' web-back feet, paddle tail, breath-holding ability, and lodges with underwater entrances are stalwart defenses for predators. A pond is like a castle wall, or really a moat for a slow, awkward, waddling rodent. So, a pond in Patagonia is of little use to a beaver because there's nothing to hide from. It's just that creating them is in their DNA. They hear water, and they have to dam it. This all creates a pretty interesting irony. Humans generally build dams with grand, intentional goals: to power cities, secure water supplies for millions of people and crops, and to protect ourselves from floods, potentially saving thousands of lives. But the road to noble infrastructure is paved with degraded ecosystems and unintended consequences. Beavers don't care about the bigger picture. They aren't trying to save the planet, filter groundwater, or build a sanctuary for migratory birds. They're just trying not to get eaten. Their engineering intent is entirely selfish, and yet, because their structures are built within the boundaries of natural rhythms, porous, temporary, and connected to the floodplain, their purely selfish engineering accidentally adds to the richness, complexity, and biodiversity of a river system, at least if it happens in the right setting. I joke about beavers being my professional rivals, but the truth is that they're also kind of mentors. I give the little guys a nod of respect. We have the blueprints, the bulldozers, and the professional rigor, but with millions of years of practice over us, the rodents still have a lot they can teach us about how to reshape a landscape. If you want to actually see a beaver restoration project in real life, my friends at Planet Wild have the perfect video. It's funny, I had no idea it was their next mission when I wrote this video, but the timing worked out perfectly. They bought a 20-hectare abandoned fish farm in Poland and introduced beavers to convert it into a wetland. It's a really cool project because it's so thoughtful. They even worked with neighboring landowners to minimize any nuisance the beavers might cause. If you've never heard of today's sponsor, Planet Wild, it's a not-for-profit organization focused on environmental restoration, but they do things a bit differently. Every month, their community of over 25,000 members funds a mission related to protecting endangered species, oceans, or forests. Then they produce a video and release it on YouTube so you can see what your contributions actually achieve. I've been a member for a while now, and I just think it's fun. With Planet Wild, I feel much more like a part of a group, and I look forward to the monthly videos when I get to see how my contributions are doing something positive. Their beaver mission I mentioned earlier is just one example. They do a lot of infrastructure-related projects, including helping to reconnect wildlife populations separated by highways and railroads, and rewilding a transmission line corridor. And they don't just document each mission once, they go back and revisit later to give 1, 3, and 10-year updates. If you've been looking for a neat way to give back, I think Planet Wild is a very cool way to do it, and to prove it, for the first 100 people who sign up, I'll cover your first month. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description and use my code PRACTICAL8 to get your first month free. No catches, you can cancel anytime, you can give whatever amount that feels right to you. Check out some of their missions, like the recent beaver restoration video, and I hope you'll consider joining. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you think.